Nuclear Abroad panel. So if you make your way up here. And as we set up for the next panel, we've got one more panel before the break, and we're on time so far this morning. So thanks, everybody. It's great to have both practitioners and sort of industry observers. I think the University of Michigan, Todd, Allen, and Denia are doing some amazing work with the fastest path to zero. And it's great to see that complement the work that folks are doing on the ground. Chairman Wright this morning talked about the importance of international relationships in the nuclear field. So we want to delve into that a little bit more deeply with our next panel. And that is going to be moderated by my colleague, Faith Sanchez. So Faith.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this morning. The conversations yesterday, today have been great, and we have an awesome one teed up for y'all here. I know Bonnie mentioned that she had an earlier commitment, so she might come in halfway through this session. That's okay. So yeah, thank you, Laura, for that introduction. We're super excited to be here today. I think as you talk about new nuclear projects in the U.S., it's so important to also kind of look abroad and see what our friends elsewhere are doing and what lessons learned we can kind of pick up from that. And so this conversation really is aimed to explore the different aspects of nuclear abroad. So that includes, the regulatory pathways, how people are doing public engagement in their respective communities and countries, deployment planning, how we're also dealing with the waste issue and what some waste solutions that they've tried out there has been. So I'll go ahead and introduce my panel, and then I'll kind of let them do a better introduction. But I'm joined by Justin Browder. He is with Jensen Hughes, Lauren Hughes with Atlantic Council Global Energy Center, and then Phil Matthews, who wears two hats today. He's with New Leaf, and he also is the Vice President of GMF Europe. So thank you all so much for being here. Super excited for this conversation. And I think if you all want to kind of go ahead, give a little brief introduction of what your role is, and kind of speak a little bit to what international collaboration has kind of helped advance in your own programs, projects. So yeah, with that, Justin, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Justin Browder with Jensen Hughes. We're a global engineering and consulting firm focused on anything related to risk, reliability, and safety. We have many years of experience in the existing nuclear fleet doing probabilistic risk assessment work, PRA, another acronym for you. Focus on equipment failures, fire, wind, flood, seismic-related hazards and impact on the existing nuclear fleet. We've been getting more involved with the advanced nuclear reactor area here recently. We're actively working with vendors on designs, supporting them from a design optimization standpoint and a fire protection standpoint. We've also been supporting the utilities and off-takers with helping them identify which technologies, which sites may be of interest. I think the reason I was invited here was to talk about our work with the Department of State. We have an existing contract mainly focused on Central and Eastern Europe through the U.S. Department of State. We are helping them with SMR and advanced reactor technology, trying to develop their ecosystem, I think is the key word for today, helping them develop that to ensure safe, reliable, and secure nuclear programs. So part of the reason we're there is to help them develop their nuclear program for SMR. Some of these countries have existing nuclear infrastructure. They have policies, but not so much on the SMR or advanced reactor design. So helping them with that. There are huge initiatives, as we heard this morning through the NRC chair, is carbon reduction is a huge concern, and also energy security. Things are in flux there, so they're trying to develop alternate means of security. So that's their main goal there. Some of that's coal to SMR conversion to avoid carbon taxes. From the U.S. government standpoint, we're there to help from non-proliferation energy security standpoint. The other thing is obviously, U.S. exports. So U.S. vendor technology, engineering, licensing, support, so export there. As far as themes and what we've been working on is mainly technology selection, site selection, workforce development, some waste disposal efforts, emergency planning zones, licensing, and financing.
Thank you so much, Justin. Lauren, go ahead.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Faith, and ECA. My name is Lauren Hughes. I'm the Deputy Director of the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center's Nuclear Energy Policy Initiative. And I just wanted to spend a brief second about explaining why a foreign policy think tank is here. We were founded in 1961, and our namesake is a legacy of our focus on the Transatlantic Alliance and backstopping NATO. The organization has since expanded to about 300 people across 16 different regional and programmatic centers, one of which is the Global Energy Center. We're a team of about 25 people focused on all the above energy sources, and I'm part of the 3-person team that focuses on both nuclear abroad and in the United States. And I just want to spend another second drawing that through line between local and state concerns and how they have international and national impact. So in 1953, we heard yesterday one of the speakers reference President Eisenhower's Atoms for Peace speech, where he really articulated the case for a peaceful use of civil nuclear energy for not only power purposes, to expand energy access around the world, but for potentially agricultural use, all of these different non-power applications like desalination in some of these countries that we're seeing today. And it really was the United States that was kind of the backbone of ushering in that atomic age internationally, domestically with our own fleet deployment, but then of course internationally with the deployment of commercial and research reactors. And it's because of that domestic deployment of tens of reactors here and the maturation of our nuclear regulator, which, with the predecessor AEC and of course Chair Wright's Nuclear Regulatory Commission, that has matured into an organization that is today recognized around the world for its independence, transparency, and commitment to public health and safety. And to Chair Wright's point, that kind of gold seal of approval for these reactors is really critical in making that case for U.S. exports abroad today. And now, today, since we're kind of past that really strong period of growth, the United States is trying to reassert its energy competitiveness in these markets, and it's a strategic competition. We were the global supplier of these technologies, and our market position has eroded. We have new competitors and some friendly friendly co-opetition. But we have Russia, and increasingly, we will see in the coming decades, China proposing reactor tenders that are integrated, full-service models to host countries, both current and emerging. And so I really think it's important to talk about how the impact of kind of U.S. companies being healthy and robust domestically, playing into that role of bolstering U.S. leadership. And it really goes beyond just selling a reactor. This is not just a financial transaction for a physical commodity. It's really a decades-long relationship that must be stewarded in many of the aspects that Justin talked about too, workforce development, all of these different safety, security, and non-proliferation standards. And I know we'll kind of delve in more into where the interest is coming from, but just to very briefly touch on how this has affected my local work, which was an ask you made, Faith. Feel very fortunate that for the last 2 years, I've been stewarding a program called Atoms for Appalachia, which some of you have participated in partnership with Breakthrough Energy to have conversations at the state level and regional level about advanced reactor deployment. And for me, it was so exciting to learn more about how much energy and activity there is at the state level. My background before the Atlantic Council was specifically on U.S.-Japan relations for about a decade. So just really appreciate all of you being here, telling me more about what's going on in your states, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you, Lauren. Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Faith, and good morning, everyone. So, as Faith said, I'm Philip Matthews. I'm the Executive Director of New Leaf. We are the equivalent of the ECA in the UK, so we represent local government and communities there. I'm also wearing another hat, as Faith has said. I'm the Vice President of GMF Europe. So we're a pan-national network of municipalities, local governments across 15 states in Europe, and we're a growing network within Europe as well. So just in terms of the conversation, first thing I want to say is, coming from Europe over here, it's been a fantastic couple of days. I've learned so much. A lot of the information about all the technologies that are under development in the States has been really informative and really interesting. I think also the conversations like that last session as well, just understanding the community dimensions and the dynamics that are ongoing, the conversations have been had. Really great to see both the commonalities and the differences maybe in experiences between the States and Europe. And the last sort of introductory thing I want to say was just really about how this fits in with some of the wider work we're doing. We've been speaking to Seth and ECA for a number of years now, working with the IEA, ECA, the Canadian Association, and others, trying to building a global partnership of nuclear communities. And I think that dialogue and the opportunities it offers, for example, for me to come here and listen to the American experience is really valuable in understanding how everything's working across the world. Just a few other comments really about the European experience. Talking about international experience, of course, within Europe, we are a group of nations. We have international frameworks working at the European level. So we have that internal dynamic, and obviously we're also engaging with America and others as well. Within Europe, we have a very diverse range of experiences around nuclear. So we have countries that had a big nuclear program, like Germany, and have moved out of nuclear. We have countries that have never had nuclear, but are now interested. We heard mention of Poland earlier. Norway is another one very interested in new nuclear now. We have countries like Sweden, which chose to phase out nuclear and are now coming back into a focus on nuclear. We have countries that are not likely to ever have nuclear power. And we have countries like my own, the UK and France, which have a long and large nuclear legacy, so previous nuclear sites, current nuclear sites, and plans for a large nuclear program. And I'll maybe say more about the UK experience before. But so there's a diversity of experience, diversity of political cultures as well. I mean, from the UK, we look at how Sweden and Finland have delivered their geological disposal facility. And our political culture, much more oppositional. It's taking a hell of a lot of time in the UK compared to what it's taking in other parts of Europe, maybe with a more consensual approach. So in terms of American companies engaging in Europe, I think there's a lot to understand that local dynamic and that local political culture. As you were saying, Lauren, it's a long-term conversation, and there's a need to understand that as well. We have, of course, commonalities around regulation. So we have the Euratom framework operating across a lot of European countries. The UK was part of that. Because of Brexit, we came out of that. I have to say, conversations in government in the UK, there was no recognition as part of those conversations on Brexit that would also necessitate the exit from Euratom. So there's a lot of activity with our nuclear regulators and getting them up to step up to oversee that extra responsibility there. But of course, as the UK now, we're outside Euratom. We've been building partnerships with Canada and the States around regulation, which I think is a very positive sign as well. And the last thing really just to say, is transnational framework within the European Union on small modular reactors, the European Industrial Alliance. This brings together the Commission, technology providers, academics, regulators, and other organizations, civil society organizations. We as GMF Europe, we chair one of the technical working groups in that. They've all got a work program. We're doing the engagement aspects of that. So that's all working forward in the next few years. And they've also identified 9 SMR technologies that are identified for support, and they're both indigenous European technologies like Rolls-Royce from the UK, and also international beyond Europe technologies as well. So lots happening, and I think my core message is just about that complexity and that dynamic that there is within Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. Bonnie, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone, this is Bonnie Hong, Director of International Programs, Nuclear Science and Technology at the Idaho National Laboratory. And I'll go ahead and allow you to kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your role and your experience with international collaboration through INL.
Great, thank you. Good morning. My name is Bonnie Hong, and as Faith mentioned, I am the Director for International Programs for Nuclear Science and Technology. We are a Department of Energy national laboratory. We're the National Nuclear Laboratory for Department of Energy. We do a lot of research and development on civilian nuclear energy, as well as critical infrastructure. So we have been working a lot with our established country national nuclear laboratories that already have nuclear programs established in their countries, such as UK, Canada, France, Korea, Japan. We also have been working a lot with the emerging countries that have recently signed on to the nuclear pledge to triple the nuclear energy by 2050. So there's over 31 countries that have signed already, and those countries have been looking into either adding a new nuclear plant or adding nuclear to their energy mix. And we have been here to help them do it safely and securely. We've been providing capacity building training to help them understand what considerations they may need to think about that they haven't thought already. We're working with a lot of these emerging countries as they get their NEPIO going with the IAEA milestone approach. A lot of these countries are still at level 0, so they're still trying to figure out what they need to do, what they need to get in place. They're working on their regulatory, they're working on their policies, and we're here to help them and know that partnering with the U.S. is not just a procurement. They also get the expertise of all the national laboratories and the universities.
Thank you, thank you. Yeah, so let's go ahead and kind of get this conversation kicked off. I know that you've all touched a little bit from your own perspectives. A little overview of the different countries you work with and kind of the status of them, but I'd love if we could maybe dive a little deeper and you guys can speak to what the current state of new nuclear development, deployment, and planning is in the countries that, I know there's a lot, so maybe one or two, but that you engage with, observe with. And Phil, actually, let's go ahead and start with you if you want to kind of speak about the UK a little bit more.
Okay, thanks, Faith. Yeah, so I can't cover the whole of Europe. I'll say a little bit about the UK situation. So where we're at in the UK, we have a current fleet of nuclear stations which are due to close by the end of this decade. We have one large gigawatt station under construction and another one just about to get the go-ahead. It's almost certain, or it will get the go-ahead finally this summer as well. But they're two large gigawatt stations. I think beyond that, it's almost certain that any new development beyond that will be small modular reactors and maybe other types, diverse types of advanced reactors as well. We had to change of government last year. The new government's recommitted to nuclear, and there's been a particular interest in artificial intelligence. There's a national objective to be a world leader in artificial intelligence, and certainly SMRs are seen as part of the underpinning of that as well. The government, a couple of years back, set up an arm's length body called Great British Nuclear, which is the delivery vehicle for small modular reactor development in the UK. So they've already bought a couple of sites near to former nuclear stations. So they're site ready for that. There's discussions about co-financing development. And they've also been involved in shortlisting technologies and companies for support. So we're down to the final stage of that. The three that are still in the process are Rolls-Royce, Holtec, and also GE Hitachi. And it's interesting that Holtec as well, they've been talking about establishing a large manufacturing base within the UK that would support their operations in the UK, Europe, and the Middle East as well. And I guess that's obviously also seen as a useful plus point in terms of the assessment. So there will be a decision this summer, and between 1 and 3 of those technology providers will be taken within that process and taken forward. And then we would expect to see fairly quick development, at least in those 2 sites to start with. But there are other technologies potentially coming in as well. So we have a regulation process, the generic design assessment. TerraPower is entered into that process. Others are on the cusp of doing so as well. So outside the GBN process, there can be other providers as well, and potentially different types of providers, micro-providers, micro-reactor providers like we heard about before. And really the last thing to mention as well is that we have a national planning framework for nuclear. In the past, that's always seen the sort of 8 former nuclear sites has been the key sites for any new nuclear development, and envisaged that as being large-scale nuclear. The new planning framework, which is just about finalized now, essentially throws away that focus on sites and says, we look at criteria, and if you meet criteria, then you can move forward with a development if there's a community consent process as well. And already that's throwing up different types of proposals. So Last Energy has been talking about microreactors in a community in South Wales, a completely non-nuclear community. That may progress as others will as well. And last remark on that is I think that's going to be really interesting in terms of engagement, because current nuclear sites obviously have that experience, that engagement around completely new communities that have never had experience in nuclear and different types of reactors. That's going to be very interesting as well. Thanks.
So if you'll indulge me a little bit of a personal story to weave in a through line here. Before I joined the Atlantic Council in 2023, I worked on U.S.-Japan relations, and I remember sitting in Tokyo in July of 2022, after Russia invaded Ukraine, and sitting in a government building where the lights, there were messages being broadcast saying, you need to conserve electricity. The lights were basically dim in this office meeting because the reserve margin of Tokyo's grid was 1.5%. And this, to me, was really a sea change in Japan's kind of willingness to move forward in the restart of its reactors, because there is such a strong national security and energy security imperative. Natural gas was $40 BTU, and coal imports were $100 a ton. And that was really the only option that they had as an island nation. And it's incredible for me, of course, in being cognizant of the local context and the regulatory process, to have seen that the fleet restart move from, a few reactors provisionally working in 2014, 2015, to now over, I believe it's 16 or 17 reactors today. And that's certainly, of course, done with, a very, I think, true appreciation of what happened at Fukushima Daiichi and their commitment to remediating that site. But that was really, my old background that then led to me pivoting to the Atlantic Council, where kind of the aperture of my work expanded to this whole global network. And one of my first assignments was talking with a Romanian Minister of Energy about the cooperation between the United States and Romania on feed studies for the NuScale project and workforce development. And then I pivoted to COP28 in Dubai, where we had the declaration of tripling nuclear capacity. And really, for me, it was just such an eye-opener, and I think a lot of it hinged on kind of what happened in 2022. And countries, to Chair Wright's point, were concerned about their energy security and where they were getting their natural gas from, what their options were, to fill your point about those countries reconsidering. And then kind of in mid-2024, I was in Italy, where that was another example of a country like Sweden that is revisiting its decision to not have nuclear power. And I think it's driven by, the power applications and the potential, but also, as I mentioned earlier, kind of the non-power applications. And I think what's really exciting about the number of designs that are out there now is that there really is sort of a reactor for everyone and for lots of these different purposes. So a country like the Philippines that might not have a grid that could sustain an AP1000, there might be a reactor that is out there for them if they go through these processes that Bonnie and Justin and Phil are stewarding. So it's just, really exciting, I think, a time for us to get this right. And, I know that the people on this panel are really working to make that happen. But hard for me to just focus on one country. My director currently is in Japan. She'll be pivoting to Poland next week for the 3 Seas initiative. I know she was in Kenya and last year with Chair Wright and Department of Energy at the USA NES Summit. So really just so much activity going on that it's hard for us as a 3-person team to keep up with.
So we also support many different countries, both on all continents. We try to help them do energy safely and securely so they can have energy independence. We really got a lot more interest in nuclear after the invasion of Ukraine, because a lot of these countries were dependent on Russia for their fuel for their current reactors. So we have just been working with everybody. We have the US-Africa Nuclear Energy Summit that we have been collaborating with Department of Energy on. We've worked with East Asia Pacific with Department of State FIRST program. We've also worked with other European countries. And so we don't really narrow it down to any one country either. It's just we're working with them to help them understand what they can do, what their options are, what tools that are out there that they can use to help with economic considerations, socioeconomic impacts, fuel, you name it, technology designs. We don't pick one. They have to pick on their own depending on their data needs and what their requirements are for their country. So we just are here to help with staff exchange, as Lauren mentioned, workforce development, community engagement, stakeholder engagement, as well as research and development. So we do have a lot of interns, postdocs, staff exchange that we do with other countries, and we get to work with them and learn from them as well.
So I've been involved mostly with Bulgaria, Czech Republic, Slovakia, also Poland and Ukraine. So they're all in varying, stages. Most of what we've been focused on is hazard assessments, trying to shortlist, like Phil mentioned, shortlist sites, shortlist technologies based on need. So that's where most of the focus has been. We've also been helping some on the regulatory side with licensing. So there is a gap between large light water reactors and small modular reactors. So trying to help them understand what those gaps are, what they should be aware of. But in general, they're trying to deploy a fleet of SMRs, 2030 to 2035 timeframe is what they're targeting. The technologies kind of vary. Those countries are looking for partnerships, so they're trying to reach out. Like Poland, for instance, they have a partnership with Ontario Power Generation with the GE Hitachi design, the BWRX 300. So they're trying to leverage work that's already been done or work that's ongoing, not just in the regions, but around the world. So that's kind of the theme. There's a lot of government-to-government work. Phil mentioned the European Industrial Alliance. They have a lot of working groups that they're trying to develop focus areas. So I know there's working groups on financing. So that's obviously a big concern, not only here, but also globally. So trying to figure out how we pay for some of these projects. So they develop those working groups. They're trying to work through that, leverage lessons learned, within their region, around the globe, trying to do as much of this as efficiently as possible. So I think that's the name of the game. The more efficient we are, the more we can de-risk these projects and actually start building something. I think we'll start seeing deployments sooner rather than later.
One other resource I wanted to plug for one of our many sister organizations, because we don't have time to go into all of the different countries and where there's lots of excitement, is Third Way hosts a map about new nuclear development worldwide that's done in collaboration with a lot of sister organizations, with Clean Air Task Force now, with Pillsbury, with Energy for Growth Hub. And I know Ross and a lot of the panelists who were on yesterday are part of the Nuclear Scaling Initiative. You could pull them aside and really get a lot more information. But it's a great resource, an interactive map where you can really look at where those engagements are. And to Justin's point, the different types of engagements, whether they're really formalized government to government, whether they're soft MOUs, and things like that. So sorry, I forgot to do that.
No, it's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. We don't have too much time, and there's so much I think that we could really discuss. But I know that one of the questions that folks have kind of been wondering is with the new technologies, the different challenges that come with these new technologies, SMRs, have international regulators, been adapting to those challenges, and what are some of those barriers, or what are the enablers that are out there that you guys have kind of seen that can be that people can look at and maybe take some lessons from? No one run at once.
So it's certainly not my strength, and something I obviously won't call on Chair Wright to do this, but what I will say is there are efforts at the International Atomic Energy Agency to have kind of regulatory harmonization efforts where I think you have really useful information exchange about the processes that are underway. I don't think regulatory standardization is very likely in many cases, but at least in terms of setting the stage for success for when countries are ready to actually, license and commercialize the reactors in their country, you can kind of make sure that you're on the same page. And I think to Justin's point, that's one of the strengths of the multinational collaboration between Tennessee Valley Authority in the United States, Orlen Synthos in Poland, and who am I forgetting? Oh, Ontario Power Generation in Canada, where of course, the multinational consortia have put forward a kind of a cost share to de-risk the whole project, and yet there are a lot of ancillary benefits to that as well in terms of those regulatory lessons learned. So they're really looking, and those regulators are talking often about how to share those experiences and make sure that the next, the deployment in Poland would eventually go well. And I'm sure TVA is looking to those experiences at the Darlington site too.
So also, there's been a lot of international regulators within, it used to be called the WGSAR, which is Working Group Safety Advanced Reactors, to the Working Group of Nuclear Technologies, WGNT. And so it's a bunch of different countries that have their regulators meeting, and then they interact with different multilateral organizations, such as the Generation International Forum and a lot of the WNE, World Nuclear Expedition or something in France, but they do a lot of those different organizations to try to get different perspectives. They still use a lot of the NRC as the gold standard. However, they are working to harmonize, not necessarily everybody have the same thing all the countries differ, but they are trying to harmonize.
Yeah, I guess I'll second that. The regulators are trying to have more conversations. Each country does have its own regulations, its own things that they're concerned with. Ultimately, safety is a priority. As was mentioned earlier, countries are trying to lean more on the NRC and the UK regulator to see what they're doing, how they're going to push forward licensing, what regulations are going to be in place, from emergency planning zones to permits and things of that nature. So they're trying to make efforts to leverage as many lessons learned, but I think they are leaning more on the U.S. NRC, the UK regulator, for some of that guidance, and that's where a lot of the technology is coming from. So they're expecting, I think, U.S. and UK to kind of lead the efforts.
And if I could just add, based on that, you jogged my brain, Justin, to that end, I know those types of reciprocal kind of exchanges that are sometimes formalized within the NRC are really critical to international regulators. So at least in my old role with the Nuclear Regulation Authority, they really appreciated having some of their working level staff come and spend time at the NRC. I certainly found that too at the Regulatory Information Conference that was held in March. It's a fora for people from all over the world to come and hear from the best of the NRC staff and those people like you. And then the only other resource I thought of, and I would be remiss not to mention this given our discussion yesterday, I also think that the OECD Nuclear Energy Agency, led by Director General Bill Magwood, as a former, commissioner, this is something certainly that he's keeping in mind in the discussions that the NEA is stewarding when they're thinking through kind of that ecosystem of development. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And Lauren, you did spur something that reminded me as well. A part of the U.S. Department of State FIRST program, there's a sub-program NEXT. So it's a government-to-government relationship. So they do have study tours where they bring international organizations over to the U.S. to have conversations, tour labs, tour universities, talk to the Nuclear Energy Institute, talk to the NRC to try to help guide some of those conversations on regulations.
Thank you all. And so as we kind of have a couple minutes left, I think we kind of maybe want to end this session kind of discussing the different community engagement efforts that you all have seen and been a part of. ECA is part of the global partnership that Phil, I'll ask you to kind of speak a little bit more to. But as we've heard, yesterday, today, these communities are interested, they're open for business, they're ready, and I think that it's a sentiment that is found, communities everywhere. And so I'd love to, have maybe some closing remarks from each one of you kind of discussing how you've seen that, what are different ways that our communities can engage with communities abroad and kind of the work that can be done there. And we'll go, Phil, come back up and end with Justin.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe I just end with flagging up some work we've been involved in at European level and within the UK as well that relates to that. As I said, just to reiterate my earlier point, I think the nuclear landscape is changing, and the engagement of new communities that have not really been part of this process is going to be really interesting. We know within the UK that existing nuclear communities are by and large very much on side in terms of new nuclear development. In fact, more of them want new nuclear development that's actually on the table at the moment, so there's actually a bit of jockeying around that. We know also, as well there's a general modest majority in the UK in favour of nuclear power, but it's very different from being in favour of nuclear power in general and being told there might be a micro-reactor at the end of your street in future. And I think so there's a lot of interesting conversations that are going to be had, and some real learning about what sort of techniques work to get that conversation and get that community consent as well. Just to touch as well on a couple of things we've been doing as GMF and within the UK. GMF, we commissioned a report recently looking at community hosting agreements. So this is an overall framework for how a developer, the municipality community might agree a framework for proceeding and also deliver added value to the community beyond the direct plant itself as well. So we identified a whole range of ways in which, or aspects of a community hosting agreement. The first is about financial incentives, so community benefits, tax reductions, things like that as well. Obviously employment's a big plus, but the supply chain, how you stimulate the supply chain, and particularly the local supply chain, I think is important. Quality of life measures and mitigation measures, so in construction and during operation, how do you mitigate against noise, dust, transport impacts and like as well. Housing is a huge issue. We've got a big nuclear site in Hinkley at the southwest of England under construction at the moment. 15,000 workers come in there. Generally men, generally younger men. That's a big impact on the community. It's also huge pressure on local housing. So there's an agreement about how you provide the extra housing for those workers and also ensure their integration properly with the community during that time. Again, it's interesting. They were originally envisaged to be up at 7,000 workers up to about 2026, 27 when the plant was due to open. The plant's now not due to open until 2031, and there are far more workers than envisaged. So having something that can renegotiate and evolve as the plans for a site evolve, I think is very useful as well. Community development, provision of extra facilities for community, a big thing, and also critically inclusive decision making. So how do you have frameworks that allow the municipality, the local community, and the developer to have these ongoing conversations as well. So as I said, Hinkley Point's a good example. Beyond the housing thing I mentioned, they've set up a national nuclear centre of excellence in skills as part of that. So that's going to be an ongoing asset that's really not just for that community, but for the whole country, and I think that's going to be very valuable. And the last thing is just about engagement itself. I mean, we've seen how, in the UK we have sort of site stakeholder groups come together, have conversations, but these were set up decades ago. The world's moved on, we communicate online. We know these groups don't reach harder to reach groups within communities as well. So lots of innovative ideas, both about online engagement coming up, and also an example from the Netherlands. I think you had, for those of you last year, with our President Gerben Dijksterhuis speaking at the event. In his community in the Netherlands, they've established this community panel, so they've got 100 local people, half of whom are under the age of 35, because this is a very long-term project for the new nuclear reactor there, and they're involved in a sort of deliberative dialogue throughout this, and I think you get a lot more value out of that considered decision-making that can help inform the wider community rather than just maybe ad hoc meetings and so on as well. It can certainly complement that as well. So I think it's a fluid landscape, and there's a lot of new ideas we can possibly embrace to support engagement.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to Faith and ECA. I think I just want to spend some time thinking through what Emily from the last panel talked about with kind of place-based discussion and building out relationships, that connective tissue. And that's something that's really come through for me, bridging very local work. We do the most state-based engagement of the entire Atlantic Council, and all of the international work that we all keeps our calendar quite full. And yet I think, going to that point about being authentic, I think it's so important that we have dedicated civil servants in these countries to lay the groundwork for and the framework for future deployments or tenders, and because that's what enables the reference units or these reactors to actually come forward. And I think I had a discussion recently with an African head of state who was Executive Secretary Emeritus of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty Organization. And he was just really making this, call to the United States showing up, having that authentic engagement over time, and that just because these countries might be in conversations with Russia or other, market competitors doesn't mean that we can't be there and play a role. And to that point, I think, as developers in the United States, we are not a state-owned enterprise like Russia and China when they go into these meetings, which requires us to be flexible and innovative and communicate well. And to the extent that we can, I think, share information when appropriate about kind of some of those localization efforts on supply chain or perhaps some low-hanging fruit, like on the workforce development side that bolsters what Bonnie and Justin and others in this room I know are working on, that pays really long-term dividends. And it is about investing in the people and that long-term relationship that I think is just really, it echoes to me through that international line all the way down to the local too. And through my work on Atoms for Appalachia, where we visited West Virginia, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Tennessee last year. We were in Virginia last week in Lynchburg, and we'll be in other states. It's just that really rings true to me. And so thank you again for this opportunity. Look forward to talking over coffee.
So based on what everybody has said so far, it is true. The definition of community isn't just local, it isn't just regional, it isn't just international, it's a lot of different things. Our laboratory is working with a lot of the US vendors on demonstrations as we currently speak, no matter where the location is. And so we have different national programs that work with these different industry vendors, such as the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation in Nuclear, GAIN, and also our National Reactor Innovation Center. So these help collate lessons learned, best practices, and this is what we're getting from a lot of the visitors that are coming internationally to visit our laboratory. It used to be where they would only visit in the summer because they liked the good weather. Now they're taking any chance they get. We even had a Middle Eastern country come the second week of February 2 years ago, which was the second coldest week in Idaho, and they came, they weathered the storm, they were wonderful guests. And so, but they're coming now to learn about what did we find out, what did we learn, not just about specifics of technologies or specific, they don't have just one question. They want to know, how did this all happen? What's the culture? How do we address all this? How do we help our communities understand? How do we help our stakeholders understand? How do we help our investors understand? And so that's kind of where our laboratory, we're engaged in all of those different items. As I mentioned, we do a lot of Department of State first capacity building training. I am hosting a study tour next week, as a matter of fact, and they are coming from 5 different countries just to learn about best practices, lessons learned from the demonstrations, not necessarily about one specific field component or how do we do regulatory, but it's everything. It's not just one thing. We also help with curriculum for different universities in different countries to help build upon getting our workforce established, having early career options available to different individuals, and to help enhance that. One of the things we're doing is with the, Lauren mentioned the OECD NEA, they have a NEST program, which is Nuclear Energy Science and Technology Program, and they have widened and broadened that out over the years to include SMRs. So they host a different SMR workshop in a different country each year, and that was coordinated by McMaster University in Canada. So that is to enhance careers for professors, postdocs, anybody in the industry to come work at, say if you work in a lab in Belgium and you want to come work at Idaho National Laboratory for a few months, that they enable that transaction to happen, help pay for the costs and the experience. So those are the types of things we're working. And then for local engagement, we have the honor of having our own Mayor Casper attend some of our international meetings when her schedule allows, and talking about local community engagement and how we work with the different stakeholders and how the community responds to certain things, the challenges that she's had, and we really, really appreciate that, because otherwise it wouldn't be honest and true and candid.
So I guess just from an industry perspective, kind of my big takeaway from this is a great forum for a start of collaboration, developing working groups. I think, as was mentioned on the last panel, industry's not going to go where they're not wanted and not needed. So I think, from a community standpoint, if you have the need and the community's on board, it's going to be, not too many obstructions. I think you're in a good spot as far as getting started. Feasibility studies, usually relatively low investment to understand, where we should put one of these, what the hazards are, as far as technology, what you're looking for, as we heard on previous panels, have to figure out, what your business objectives are, what the goals are, whether it's, heat or energy production. There's various things to look at there. Just develop relationships between one another. I know, the European Industrial Alliance group, they have working groups. That's a great idea. I think this is a good forum to get people together with common goals, develop those working groups, and actually start pushing this forward.
Thank you all so much. I really appreciate you guys taking the time. I think we are getting ready to take a break, so we should be back in 10 minutes. Once again, thank you so much. Round of applause for our panelists.